Hello, and welcome to the Fauxworthy Podcast, episode number 5. I'm here with Taylor Gaines again. Today we're going to be doing a television podcast, but we're going to be focusing only on comedies. We're going to talk a little bit about Review, which is now in its second season. We're going to be talking about You're the Worst on FX, which just started its second season last week. And we're going to be talking, of course, about the great John Oliver and his show on HBO last week tonight. Taylor, how you doing?
I'm good.
Yeah?
How are you?
Doing well. I know you really like Review, so I guess we should probably start there. I think you actually are the one that turned me on to Review. How did you hear about it? Like, what made you want to watch it, and why do you think it's good?
I feel like I have turned a lot of people on to Review. I feel like it was such a... How did it start? Okay, so...
Well, it was getting rave reviews.
Well, yes. I think I sort of heard about it, and then Alan Sepinwall, I think, had it in his top 10 for the year or something. And I was at home for winter break, and I thought, oh, well, let me check it out. It was on Amazon Prime. And everybody mentioned that Pancakes Divorce Pancakes.
Yes, an amazing episode.
Everybody was like, this is the best episode. You have to watch this one. So that was only the third one, so I figured, okay, I'll watch these first 3. And, you know, before too long, I had watched it, and then I showed it to my roommates, and then they showed it to my other roommates, and then I had seen the whole show 3 times in the course of like a month. So you said why you want me to talk about why I like the show?
Why do you think it's good? What do you think sets it apart from like other comedies? Just the cleverness of it and the conceit of it, because
I think the conceit is good and it's funny. To the idea of reviewing life experiences instead of you know, what is it, food, books, or movies or whatever. Like, that's a funny idea, but what really makes the show, what elevates the show to another level, I think, is the interconnectedness of everything that happens. For example,
how they keep continuity.
Like the Pancakes Divorce Pancakes episode is just... I mean, I don't know if we want to spoil that. I feel like we always spoil stuff on here.
I mean, yeah, we should maybe...
But I'll just say, they find a way to connect, like, 3 different life experiences. I'll try something less spoilery than that one. Like in the first episode, he reviews stealing, doing drugs, and going to high school prom. And,
yes.
And somehow all of those things wind up connecting in the end to, like, make everything funnier together. Like, it sounds dumb to explain it that way, but basically
like each thing he's reviewing within an episode will tie into one another unexpectedly, kind of.
Right, and by the end of the first season, it builds to like this like emotional climax that is just so much more powerful than you would expect from a show on Comedy Central, where you're like crying tears of joy and happiness or joy and happiness. But no, you're just like thrilled with how well it all ties together, and it's also just a really funny show. I guess that's what elevates it, I think, is the connectedness of everything.
Yeah, and it's so funny because in most comedies, especially sitcoms, you have storylines that are basically brought up, resolved, and then dropped within an episode. And this isn't really a sitcom, but it is, that half-hour format. But it's like every episode brings back something either from the previous episode or something from a few weeks before. And it's really funny how they keep that continuity going. It's just kind of like a running joke. Also, Andy Daly, I don't think I've ever seen him in anything but this show, and it's just tailor-made to his talents and like what he is best at, I think.
That's what I was going to say, is the other thing that's great about it is him, because the show couldn't exist without him. It couldn't exist without Forrest McNeil. His just sheer devotion to doing whatever people ask him to do. Mm-hmm. To get... Like I said, I'm not going to try not to spoil anything, but to get a request that just says, please review They're All Is Aching, and to turn that into...
It makes no sense.
To turn that into 7 minutes of an episode is like craziness, and it's so funny. But he does... I've become more familiar with him as time has gone on. Mm-hmm. Like, I wasn't familiar with him before, but now I understand he has his background is in improv.
Okay.
He's
That makes sense.
He's like a big time name in the improv community. He's got 3 different podcasts, I believe. There's one called the Andy Daly. I'm probably gonna get this wrong because it's a mix of words. It's the Andy Daly podcast pilot something, and basically it's him. They never say that it's him, but you figure it out pretty quickly. It's him playing different characters and doing just the pilot episode of like 8 different podcasts. So like one of them is him playing this guy who's the poet laureate of the West, like the Wild West. I forget his name off the top of my head, but he does that. And then there's one where he plays this guy Chip Gardner, who's the host of a game show where all the contestants always die on the game show or they never win. And like that podcast was called Hail Satan with Chip Gardner. There's a bunch of those, and then there's the Dead Authors podcast, which features Paul F. Tompkins, who people might know from BoJack Horseman, I guess. I don't know what else he has.
He's someone who kind of is just always working on something. It seems like he's involved in a lot of different comedy
But he's
projects.
also very involved in the improv thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So he hosts the Dead Authors podcast, and he had Andy Daly on that a few times. And also, I think that comedy Bang Bang section of the culture is kind of where a lot of the people from Review's creative team came from. I wouldn't quote me on that, but I think that's probably true. Anyway, I know that's what his background is in. And the show is it a remake?
It's a remake of, I believe, an Australian show. The Australian show ran for a little bit, but didn't last that long. And they basically I've never seen an episode of it, but I believe it takes the same exact model and they just do their own thing with it. I mean, the show is really funny. I don't know how strong like the ratings are or how many people watch it. Most people I talk to about it have never even heard of it. It seems like it's definitely going in that vein of like a cult show where there's just like going to be a small but devoted group of rabid fans. But you should definitely check it out if you haven't watched it. It's in its 2nd season. I think we have like 3 episodes left of season 2. But it's really funny. It's really sharp. It's sad at times, and I think that they get away with that in a really interesting way.
So let me ask you though. I want to ask you kind of a general question relating to comedies, because I think Review and You're the Worst are good examples of the difference I'm going to ask you about. There's kind of a cringe comedy aspect to Review where I've shown it to some people and they've just said, things that make me feel uncomfortable I don't enjoy as much. And we'll talk about You're the Worst later, but it's more just, I would say, emotionally honest and just funny and less based off of making you feel uncomfortable. Do you differentiate in those kinds of comedies? Like, do you feel like you should enjoy one more than the other, or do you do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, I think I know what you're getting at. For me, I don't know. I have kind of an interesting, weird relationship to comedy, especially comedy like television. I just resisted it for a long time for whatever reason. I would only really watch hour-long dramas. And I don't know if it was just the fact that when I actually started to care, like stuff like The Office was just in the middle of its run and there was just so many episodes to watch, and 30 Rock is another one that people love, and Community, and there was sort of like NBC kind of had this dominant like 2-hour block for a while that they've decided that they don't want at all anymore. But until probably I would say like within the last like year and a half, I just never really watched comedies because I didn't realize that they could be as rewarding as they are. And then I started watching some really good ones, and I became more open to it. I think actually the show that broke me into really appreciating comedy in television is actually Portlandia, which is a really obscure show on IFC, but it is so funny. And the cringe comedy aspect of it, for me, doesn't really... I don't have that problem where it doesn't really make me uncomfortable. I mean, you can definitely see, like, oh my gosh, this is going to go in a very uncomfortable place. But I think that the way that it's done on review is so clever. The jokes are sharp, and then you have, like, those moments that are kind of sad and emotional. And you do have moments where you're just, like, you know that Forrest is going to get himself into such a situation and is going to be so, so awkward. Last week's example, I mean, I won't spoil anything. Last week's episode is a perfect example of just, like, a whole episode, basically, where he puts himself in a really uncomfortable situation.
And there are times where it's so uncomfortable that I'm not even really laughing. Like, I'm just kind of, my jaws just kind of dropped. But I still think, maybe it's because of the strength of the performances on the show, particularly Andy Daly, but, like, I always still kind of find it funny. I think also knowing it's a fictional world for me helps me not to feel awkward about it most of the time, even though you still have to sometimes. But I guess the more interesting comparison might be, I don't want to get too into this, but like Nathan For You, which is like real people experiencing really awkward things versus Review where it's kind of fictionalized. But I don't know, I find a lot of things funny, so
Yeah, I've definitely opened up more to, like, the ideas of what, you know, and there's lots of different kinds of comedy, as we're sort of getting at, that are currently on TV. I mean, You're the Worst and Review, I feel like I think you mentioned this just a few minutes ago, they're both incredibly honest shows. Like, they feel, there's just an honesty there that you can't really get around, and it elevates it to another level where it's not just like a dismissive, it's not an episode of The Big Bang Theory. It's not dismissive. It's not there to just entertain you. It's there to entertain you, and then you kind of... There's always a little twinge of something extra, whether it's, like, some sort of biting satire or just, like, something really, like you're really feeling for Forrest because he's, like, he's going through something that you know, don't really see coming.
I think the emotional honesty is one of those things. It's kind of similar to when you're watching a movie and you're trying to decide whether the world feels like realistic, you know? Mm-hmm. Where Mad Max, which I guess is the only movie I can think of for the last 6 months.
Here's our plug for Mad Max. Go watch it.
Weekly plug, I guess. But there's a part of it where you can kind of buy into this post-apocalyptic world just because of how detailed and lived in everything feels, where being an emotionally honest comedy just helps you buy into the characters and care about what's happening in a way that, not to like rag on Big Bang Theory, but like a show like that might not, because you're just kind of feel like they're just there to get to the next joke, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, shows like that are built, like the old-fashioned sitcoms are very much built around just the jokes and keeping people... It's like a diversion. It's like a half-hour diversion. You sit and you watch it. You know, I don't remember who... Maybe this is Andy Greenwald says this, that it's like the thing you watch while you're folding laundry or whatever. But,
I think the problem is a lot of people view comedy in general as the thing you watch while you're folding laundry. Where, like, for me, I might watch Fear the Walking Dead while I'm folding laundry, just because there's definitely a perception of dramas being more quote-unquote important than comedies are.
And more plot-driven, so you have to pay attention.
Yeah, they have more things to say, but there's so many just weighty, heavy, and, like, unfunny dramas that a lot of times I find myself just, like, wanting to watch comedy because it's so much more... You feel like more of a TV viewer and you're enjoying yourself.
Right, and you experience such a range of emotions that it doesn't feel so one note.
And that's why the best dramas on TV are sometimes the best comedies on TV. I know people have talked about this before, but like Breaking Bad was really funny.
Oh, absolutely. It was hilarious. It was hilarious at times.
Mad Men was really funny. Just a lot of the really great... If you want to be... advice to all TV writers. If you want to be a great show, you have to be funny and be able to handle drama. I just think that's a fact, especially when there's 400 different shows people could be watching.
Well, this might be getting like a little off topic. Maybe it's something we can save for the end. But I think it speaks a lot to kind of the state of TV and where we are in terms of how good the comedies are and how so many of the dramas fall flat. If you look at the nominees for Outstanding Comedy Series, they're all just amazing shows. I mean, I can't speak to Modern Family. I know people gripe that it's nominated year after year. I've never really watched it, so I have no opinion. But you have Louie, Parks and Rec, Silicon Valley, Transparent, Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, and Veep. And I'll say the last two are two of my favorite things I've watched in the last year. Veep, I watched over the summer and it was hilarious. And Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt may be the best Netflix show ever. So I think it's just really interesting that there's so many great things being done. Even just on Comedy Central, you can look at what they've been doing with their brand in the past, probably 4 or 5 years. Drunk History is really funny. I've watched the first 2 seasons of Broad City. That's really good. I haven't watched Amy Schumer's show. Is that show good? Is it funny?
I've seen some of it? Sporadic clips from it. I've seen that show in the same way that I experienced a lot of Key and Peele, which is just YouTube.
Right. You just watch the sketches, individual sketches.
And we'll talk about YouTube later, I think, when we talk about John Oliver. But a lot of shows are realizing how important it is to get people to just be invested in it in some way, whether you're watching it on, Wednesday nights or on YouTube the next day or on YouTube 3 years later.
Right.
But yeah, I can't really speak to Amy Schumer's show as a whole. I have heard that the episode parodying 12 Angry Men was supposed to be very good.
Yeah. Yeah.
But since you're talking about all these great comedies, I guess we should talk about You're the Worst, which a lot of critics had in their top 5 or 10 last year at the end of the year.
Yeah.
And I want to know, do you think that highly of that show, or is it just something that you like to turn to? How do you view You're the Worst compared to all of these other great comedies that are on?
For me, I would definitely, just taking into account personal taste, I would put it pretty close to the top. I think it's really funny and relatable, and it definitely does some outlandish things from time to time, but in a really believable way for the way the world of this show is set up. I mean, I watched the first season last summer live as it was airing, because, I was trying to check out all the new things that were coming on. And last summer, FX did this weird thing where they paired it with Married, which is still on FX, and You're the Worst has now moved to FXX. But as a whole hour block, You're the Worst was clearly the better part of that. And then I would still watch Married and be like, this is okay, but it's not anywhere near as good as You're the Worst. And then by the end of the season, I was just completely in on the show. And I was really excited that they were going to get another season. And I don't know in terms of ratings how well it's done, but it's definitely, currently right now, it's definitely a critical darling. But you watched it over the summer, right? And kind of did it in one.
About 34 days ago, I sat down on my couch and I turned on the pilot episode of You're the Worst.
Which is actually not the best. I've rewatched it since. It's good, but the show gets better, I think.
But, I typically also don't like to judge shows, especially comedies, just on the first episode.
Yeah, absolutely.
You just have to see something there. The first time I watched Arrested Development, I probably laughed one time during the pilot, but I was like, that's enough. I'll watch another one. And then, I love Arrested Development, but I won't get into that. But yeah, 12 hours later, which, don't get me wrong, You're the Worst season 1 is not 12 hours long. Just by the end of the day, I had finished watching the whole first season. And it's definitely very enjoyable. I thought it was very charming in a way that's weird because it's about such horrible people.
Yeah.
And it's got some really clever dialogue, and what do they say? Daniel Craig looks like an angry baby.
Yeah.
There's just random lines in it that are really funny, and the two main characters are very, very funny.
They're great performances, yeah.
Yeah, Chris Gere and
Aya Cash, yeah,
are just superstars.
and they have a really interesting chemistry. And they, like, going back to a little bit what we were talking about, how review can kind of do those really funny parts, and then there's really, like, sad, kind of bleak, emotional moments. I think You're the Worst in its first season had a couple of really good scenes that were, like, sort of, like, traditional romantic comedy scenes where things got, like, briefly sappy, and then they would go back to just being, like, really sour and, you know,
yeah, I mean, even
ragging on each other.
I think we're going with the approach of not spoiling anything this time.
Mm-hmm.
But even in the season 2 premiere, there's a moment where I'll just say they start to seem like normal people,
Mm-hmm.
and then they're instantly like very uncomfortable with that idea,
Right.
so they just go and do something else. But how did you feel about the two? I feel like there are more, but really the two main supporting characters.
Mm-hmm. Well, perhaps really quick, we should just explain that this show, it's just started its second season last week. Basically, the basic premise of the show is, the show is a romantic comedy, but not at all in the traditional sense. So it's about two people who, living in LA, they meet, they're both very anti-relationship, and they basically, by the end of the first season, have found themselves in a relationship, even though they keep speaking out against, commitment and monogamy, etc.
And they're the worst.
And they're the worst, right? They both have kind of... How would you describe their personalities? I mean, they're both very...
I'd say Chris Gere is the typical stuck-up... Is he British?
Yeah, Jimmy is a British writer living in the States, and he's completely full of himself, very pretentious. And she's a publicist for a rap musician. And, which those characters are great too. But, anyway, back to your question. Yeah, you have the two main characters, and then you have, Edgar, which is Jimmy's roommate, who is suffering a little bit from PTSD from the war. I guess he went to Iraq. Did they say that?
I don't know. There was a really dark joke in the premiere about him and doing stuff overseas.
But, Jimmy and Edgar live together, and then you have Gretchen, who's Aya Cash's character, the main female who is in a relationship with Jimmy, and then you have Gretchen's best friend, Lindsay.
So Desmond Borges plays Edgar, and is it Kether Donahue?
Donahue, yeah. I think they're both really funny, too, and I think they complement the main characters pretty well. I think I recall you saying that at first you weren't so sure about the Lindsay character.
Well,
Did you say, like, at first you kind of thought she was just annoying?
Well, I was worried that they were going to both be annoying and kind of one-dimensional because the show was going to be focused on the other two. Because they could have easily just done, a one-dimensional PTSD veteran guy who just makes really tasteless jokes all the time.
Right.
And,
But that guy's fantastic.
And Lindsay could have been... I believe they even referred to her in the initial script as Fat Lindsay. Like, she could have just been, the girl who Gretchen was just kind of there to look better than.
Right.
I don't know. I think they did a lot of work with them to make them both into legitimate characters. I'm still... If the show were just them two, I don't know if I would be into it. Because I'm still more interested in the Jimmy-Gretchen dynamic. But they're definitely funny. I mean, the episode in Season 1 where Edgar has to speak at some kind of war veterans thing and winds up meeting an actor or something. There's some very funny stuff that happens between them. And you mentioned the rap group that Gretchen represents. They're really funny.
Yeah, they're really funny.
Some kind of Childish Gambino parody.
Yeah.
That they pull off.
The show is really it's just sharp. There's
it's hard to really say that much about it.
Really great. Yeah, it's hard to say much about it other than the fact that it is purely entertaining. I look forward to it every week. Let me touch on something while we're talking about characters, though. For people who haven't watched it, there's this sort of narrative that some people adhere to, that it's very difficult to watch television shows with unlikable characters, which I'm kind of tired of hearing, because I feel like there's people we meet in life that are unlikable and we're still friends with them.
Also, what did people like about Walter White exactly? I know that
point.
No one gave up on him. Everyone was still like rooting for him by the end. A lot of people, not everyone.
Yeah, I mean, fair point. But like, do you think that that's just a stupid argument at this point, to just be like, well, I can't watch blank, whatever the show may be or whatever the movie may be, because they're unlikable people?
I mean, if some people feel that way, that's fine. But like personally, I'm much more interested in people that are just interesting.
Exactly.
For example, I want to know everything that Kanye West does from now until the end of time. That doesn't mean that I like Kanye West, but I do, but he's just so interesting that I just want to know what's happening. And not to mention, I guess the argument does bother me a little bit when I think about it, but
I just feel like it's like a thing that people throw, and I'm really trying hard not to insult anyone, but this just bothers me when people are like, well, I tried to watch that show, but the people were so unlikable. It's like they're trying to sound smarter, like they're above the show, because they're like, well, it's just not for me because I can't stand to watch people be mean to one another, or people being obnoxious, But I just feel like, how many people do I know in my life that are just so obnoxious, but I love them anyway? Like, I just feel like it's more human to portray people that are not your typical saint that you're revering.
I think of a show like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and I think that's an example where I can sort of understand where people are coming from, like, because I really enjoy that show because they're basically cartoons, but to watch like 10 of those in a row gets a little like depressing, where you're just like, why would anyone spend any time with this group of people?
Right.
And then you're like, wait, I'm spending a lot of time with this group of people. And like, I can sort of see where people are coming from with that, at like in excess, I guess, but for me to sit down once a week and watch quote unquote bad people do hilarious things, it doesn't bother me.
I mean, yeah, the show is called You're the Worst, so that should kind of tip you off as to like the fact that maybe they're not the greatest people, or like the most like kind-hearted, warm people. But I mean, a show that I really like on HBO, Girls, has just been so maligned, like basically ever since it started. Because it definitely has its supporters, but I think it's a great show. I think it's had its ups and downs, but the people on it they're not the most likable people, but they're still interesting, and I still find the show incredibly entertaining, despite the fact that they're not, warm rays of sunshine, and are not, they're all completely self-absorbed. But I know so many people that are like that, so I feel like it's just mirroring the way that people actually are, Just, there's a lot of shading to people's personalities, and nobody is wholly great or wholly bad. So anyway, but yeah, I think we're both really like You're the Worst, and I think we recommend it. It comes on Wednesday nights at 10 p.m., 10:30 p.m. I don't even know.
FXX.
I'm shilling here, but I don't even know the time that it comes on.
And we probably should at least mention, at least in that it's like a pretty vulgar show.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty dirty. The jokes are dirty. Yeah. There's some especially in season 1, there was some very visual, graphic love scenes. I'll just say it like that.
So if you're not interested, or if that stuff bothers you,
yeah, if you're not,
then you should know that,
into like sexual humor or,
but for what it's
frank
worth,
talk of intimacy.
For what it's worth, it is just funny. It's not. It's not just vulgar for vulgarity's sake.
Yeah. And like we were kind of mentioning before, there's definitely an honesty behind it, I think, that makes it just very real and more relatable. Well, I guess we should maybe roll right into talking about the man, John Oliver.
Let's talk about John Oliver. You and
Let's talk about John Oliver.
here's the first thing I want to say about this, because this is something I feel like I can actually speak on. Is you and I are both journalism students.
Yep.
Journalism majors. And I feel like John Oliver might be the best working journalist on TV. And I don't think I'm the only person who would say that.
No.
Like, okay, so for anyone who has never seen John Oliver, because he is on HBO, which I understand.
The show is called Last Week
Tonight
with John Oliver.
On HBO, usually every week. He took a couple weeks off recently. But
yeah, so
it's sort of an extension of The Daily Show, where he points out things that are, wrong with America, and just kind of makes a lot of jokes about them. But the interesting thing about his show, and one of the things I really love, is, well, for one thing, he has a lot more time than Jon Stewart did on Comedy Central. He doesn't have guests, typically. At least he tried that out in the first season, but he doesn't really do it anymore. And what he does is he'll spend the middle 15 to, or the last 15 to 20 minutes.
Yeah, it's usually the last segment.
Of his 30-minute show, just on one subject. Discrimination, food waste, stadiums, FIFA, the internet, whatever. Like, all kinds of stuff. And
prisons, he'll cover anything that he thinks is sort of needs to be addressed in society that isn't working, or maybe something that people don't know. And the amount of fact-finding that he does is incredible.
Right, and the great thing about it is how much time he spends on it, because I feel like I'm actually learning something every week, where I'm like, wow, I really knew nothing about the chicken raising industry until he just told me literally everything I could want to know about it and how messed up it is. But then the thing that really separates his show, I think, is he talks about these things, but at the end of every segment, he and the show kind of do something about it. Like, there's actually some kind of social change that they're trying to inflict upon whatever institution they're covering, which makes him less of a talking head and more of a person who is actually trying to change these things, and it really changes the show for me personally when I think about it. Do you
I honestly, I don't think I saw a single episode that he did the summer that he filled in for Jon Stewart before he got his own show, because that basically led to it, right? Because he was at Jon Stewart's desk filling in for a summer, and everyone loved it, and then HBO was like, all right, here you go. You got your own show now. Do your own thing.
You can curse, you have no commercials.
Yeah, you can use expletives, and no commercials.
Yeah, that was the great. That was one of the great parts of Jon Stewart's last show, was when John Oliver came on and Stewart was like, yeah, well, we got to go to commercial, and John Oliver was like, what the hell are commercials?
But yeah, this show, the show's brilliant. It's brilliant. I don't know anybody who... I'm sure there are some people who feel that maybe he is biased in some way. Maybe politically he will focus on something and, talk about something in society that, has maybe a liberal slant, or I don't even know what kind of slant. But...
I think he does, though. Any political assumptions he makes are few and far between, because he really builds each issue from the ground up with all the research that he does, to the point that you can just watch it without really... I mean, you might disagree with him, but you still will watch it and think that his argument at least makes a lot of sense. He's just very good at building up a good factual basis on what he's talking about, and then telling you, what's wrong with it and what you should do about it. And we talked about YouTube earlier. I think we did say that this is on HBO, but I think the reason a lot of people probably have heard of this show or have seen parts of this show is because of how active Last Week Tonight is on YouTube. I believe they upload their main segment on YouTube every single week.
Yeah. So the main segment, like the last 15 to 20 minute piece that we're talking about, that's usually just the most poignant, interesting, the one that's really well researched and is like thoroughly reported, is pretty much always available for free on YouTube. I do believe they bleep the expletives,
right?
Since they're not on actually being aired on HBO. But if you've never seen any of it, it's more than worth checking out. If you don't have to have any access to HBO, you can watch those long segments.
What do you think are some of the highlights? I mean, the FIFA one from last summer was kind of when he first broke into the like cultural bubble.
Yeah.
The televangelist one from a few weeks ago.
He's been on a roll the last few months. I mean, you said, I don't think you watched this week's episode, you said, but this week he did one on public defenders and how underpaid and they are and how poor their working conditions are and how everyone has a right to them if you can't afford it, but how little they get paid and how they're taking thousands of cases when they should only be taking like 100 per year. The public defender one from Sunday night was fantastic, but yeah, the televangelist one got a lot of attention. Really opened people's eyes, I think, to how many loopholes there are for some of these giant religious organizations that are just, they'll literally go on television and say, "Give me your money, and you will be rich, or you will make X amount of money, and you'll be, your reward will be bountiful." And he just kind of sheds a light on some of the hypocrisy of some of these
prosperity-based.
I've looked for it since, and I can't seem to find it. I don't know if they took that one down because it was just older. Maybe I need to look again. But they have one that I watched in one of my classes that was him talking to CNN about CNN removing their investigative journalism department. It was fantastic, and I can't seem to find it.
I don't remember that one. I'm
sure
I've seen every episode, so I'm sure I've seen it, but I don't recall.
Yeah, it's really good, I can't.
We were talking about him as a great reporter / journalist earlier.
Yeah, he had Edward Snowden.
That's what I was about to say. I want to mention this
Spoiler
because
alert.
I feel like this is probably the highlight of his show in general, of all of his episodes. Like this interview that he did with Edward Snowden.
Yes.
And I kind of want to finish on that because I feel like that's the best example of what he can do as a TV host.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen the episode, right?
Which one? The
Snowden
one? Yes.
So what were your thoughts on that in general?
I mean, I thought it was amazing. Wasn't it a total surprise until it aired? Like, nobody knew that was going to happen.
Well, yeah, because
it was not promoted or anything,
It was something like 2 weeks before he was like, we're not going to be back next week, but we'll be back the week after. And really, they were going to Russia to interview Edward Snowden, but no one knew.
Right.
So he came back on, and this is a great example of what I was talking about with him getting involved in things that he's reporting on. Because he basically was on the episode describing NSA and the Snowden stuff, and frankly, a lot of stuff that I still don't really understand. So I probably should watch that again.
Yeah.
Like whenever I get confused on what net neutrality is, I look up John Oliver's video because it does a great job explaining it. But he does this thing where he talks about it, and then he's like, "Man, it really would be great if someone could just ask Edward Snowden, why he did all this." And then he just looks at the camera and goes, "So we did. Like, we flew to Russia, and we talked to Edward Snowden." And it's just that's basically a great summation of every episode where he's like, "Wouldn't it be great if someone would do this? Well, we did." Like,
right.
it always is like that. But the interview is great because he doesn't attack Snowden, and he doesn't portray him as some kind of hero. He really asks him tough questions, and I think does a really good job of also somehow making it entertaining. Because he asks him, he's like, "You understand like the consequences of what you did, and also, It's just you should check out the interview if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, that's definitely an essential watch. I think it's a very good segment. That was a great surprise. I mean, he'll, like you said, he'll bring something up, really talk about it and how much of a problem it is, or how it might be fixed, and he'll be like, have you ever wondered this? And then he'll be like, well, we wondered it and we figured it out and we investigated it, and I mean, they do some hardcore investigative journalism, and it seems ironic that he did that whole segment on the CNN. I don't know, maybe I'm thinking of a different show, but I was pretty positive it was a John Oliver segment. And I've tried to YouTube it and look all over the internet, and I cannot seem to find the segment where he interviewed some people and did some investigating on CNN, removing the investigative journalism department, basically due to budget cuts, I guess, or they just didn't want to spend the money. But yeah, so how do you think this ties in with what we were talking about comedy on TV? I think it's interesting because I think when people describe John Oliver's show, they talk about how smart it is, how well researched it is, and how interesting it is that he's pushing, these interesting things into the spotlight that people aren't talking about that are, should be much more concerning to people, and I think people just don't know about them. But he does it in such a funny and just clever way, and I think it's interesting that it's all done sort of through the lens of comedy, but then there's also, like, those big segments especially, there's sort of this very serious, like, it feels like you're receiving news, because it feels so genuine and thoroughly researched, and he's presenting you facts, he's not presenting you just some satirical thing that's just for entertainment.
That is interesting, because that's basically what we've been talking about for the last 40 minutes. But I joked earlier, like, Forrest McNeil on Review, Reporter of Life, and John Oliver are two of the best reporters on TV in very different ways. And like I said, I mean, I'm not going to name drop, but I have a professor who was a big time editor for a long time, and he said to our class the other day, he said, if you're not watching John Oliver, you should, because he's the best journalist on TV. And I mean, I know I said almost the exact same words, but it's very accurate, and it's also, like you said, it's very entertaining. I guess it's not to get all journalism-y on everyone.
I mean,
but
I'm okay with that.
But I think it's a good example of what journalism needs to be going forward, because it needs to be informative, but it needs to, be entertaining or tell a story. Like, it has to make people want. It has to make people want to read it, to view it, to listen to it.
Exactly.
And it's just funny that John Oliver is the person that's kind of creating the blueprint for what the future of journalism might be.
That would be an interesting future. I think that the problem with news now, and why people are, and I'm not knocking anyone specific, but I think that the reason why there are so many young people that are uninformed is because they just don't find the news and stuff accessible. It's dry, it's uninteresting, it's just presenting facts for the most part. And unless you find a publication that writes about these things in a really interesting way or an entertaining way with good writing, it's like you're not going to seek the information out for yourself unless it's kind of being prepackaged and kind of delivered to you in, like, under the guise of basically comedy. They basically deliver John Oliver's show and say, here's a fun comedy we do where we recap the week's events and then give you, some kind of fun segment. I mean, it's very similar to what the Colbert Report and what Jon Stewart Show did in terms of the format. But I think, not to knock what those guys did, but I think John Oliver's show is just more delivering facts with a little bit less of a bias or less of a spin for comedy. He's still funny.
That's what I also wanted to mention is I think a lot of people are growing up in this environment of, like Fox News and MSNBC,
yes,
where everything is either just way over here or way over there, and you're not really getting, like, the complete story. You're kind of getting what someone already thinks about a story instead. And I really think that John Oliver's show is a very apolitical show. because he really approaches things as a journalist and not as some kind of beacon of like liberal hope or something or whatever. Like, because I think Jon Stewart had that impression of, you know, he's like the voice for the young liberals or whatever.
Right.
Where like John Oliver is just like, listen, I'm going to tell you the way it is, and I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to back it up with facts. And I just think it's... You mentioned how it relates to other comedies on TV. I think it's hard to compare it to other comedies because it's such a unique thing. But it's probably one of my 3 or 4 favorite shows on TV. It's definitely one of the things I look forward to the most each week, and I think that it's just fantastic. It's hard to come up with the right words to just praise something without talking about it, but you know, it's great. It's just, you should watch it. You should go on YouTube.
Definitely, even if you don't have access to HBO, go on YouTube, look on the Last Week Tonight channel, and they post these segments. They post some of the short segments, and they post the longer segments. I'm pretty sure you can basically make up a whole episode with all the different sections of video that they post.
And we'll save our State of Journalism podcast for like the Fauxworthy late night edition.
Yeah. we'll do something at some point. Anything else we want to talk about? Emmys are on Sunday.
Emmys are on Sunday.
Do you care? I know you don't care a whole lot.
You know, it's weird. I try not to, because I don't think rewarding people for art is really fair.
That's not really the point.
The point.
Right.
But, I mean, they're interesting. They're always interesting.
What are you rooting for, though? Is there a show that you would like to see win that you just feel strongly about?
I'm trying to remember what falls in the window. Like, you said Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt is nominated.
Is nominated for Best Comedy Series. I'm
a huge fan of that.
That's a great show.
I would root for that.
Here we go.
Guess
we're shilling for stuff we like.
Let me put on my annoying,
this is great,
pretentious hat for a second. Really, when I think of the Emmys, I think of things I don't want to win.
True.
Like I don't want House of Cards to win anything. I don't.
That's fair.
I just there's so many great...
Well, especially not for this 3rd season, if that's the season that was nominated.
Did that season get nominated?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I don't even know if they got it. I can't remember.
They must have tuned out.
I know Better Call Saul got a kind of a sort of surprise nomination for Best Drama Series.
There's just so much good stuff. Like, you know, Rectify didn't get nominated for anything, I don't think. And that's like...
Yeah.
There's just... It's such a weird game getting nominated for awards. And
yes.
Like, Jeff Daniels winning Best Actor over Jon Hamm and Bryan Cranston.
Yeah.
Was that last year? 2 years ago, whenever it was. Nothing against Jeff Daniels, because I haven't even watched The Newsroom. So I'm not going to say that he didn't deserve to win, but it's just like, you're just kind of, you watch it and you're just like, man, how did this guy not win? And without seeing The Newsroom, I think it's just a testament to how much good stuff is on TV. That you can watch something and be like, wow, how did he not win? Because there's just so much good stuff, and that it's unfair. It's unfair to award people for being the best. But, you know, that's the way it is.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Like I mentioned before in our early segment on review, I just think it's really interesting that probably of all the shows nominated, the very best shows in the crop of shows that are nominated is like the comedies. It's just all the comedies. Transparent, freaking Veep is, oh my gosh, Veep is amazing. Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. I've never watched Modern Family. That's the one everyone kind of rolls their eyes every year, like, oh, they nominated Modern Family again. Not a knock on the show. I've never watched it. I don't really have an opinion of it, but it just seems like something that it can't be as great as it was in the early days and deserve to go toe-to-toe with all these great new voices that have come on in the past year. So,
yeah, we'll see how it plays out. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe we'll chat about it, and something interesting will happen. We'll chat about it on next week's podcast. I think we're going to wrap it up there. We kept this one nice and short for you guys. Definitely well under an hour.
Definitely shorter than an episode
so
of House of Cards.
Maybe we're getting, yes, very much so. We're getting better at this, I think. We're going to try to keep them consistent. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next week. Watch Dammies on Sunday night, and maybe we'll talk about them next week. 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 Maybe we'll talk about them next week.